my ADHD family. I'm Yakini coming to you from ADHD Love. And welcome to another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk, where I talk to other parents to share their journeys and their strategies about, how they've moved through their lives. And then I also talk to experts. And today we actually have one expert that is going to be focused on the nutrition piece. So today, I'm very excited to have Becca King. She is a dietitian, and we are going to be talking about her ADHD journey. And then we also are going to be discussing how nutrition ties into ADHD. So Becca, welcome. I'm so excited to have you today. So
I'm very excited to be here. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. Had a bit of a rocky morning, but I'm good.
Yes.
So tell the audience, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then and we'll get into more details about what you do, but tell us a little bit about yourself and why do you know about ADHD so much?
So I have ADHD myself. So really have spent just time teaching myself a lot because they don't really, when you get diagnosed, they're just like, here's your meds, bye. And you're like, okay. Yeah. So I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. But yeah, I guess that's kind of how
when were you
figured things out.
Oh, I
was diagnosed when I was 19 and I'm 27 now. So
okay. So what was the ultimate reason why you decided to go ahead and go to the doctor and say, okay, something is just not fitting all here?
Yeah, so I did pretty well all through high school. I feel like I have a pretty a standard ADHD story. I did pretty well in high school. I didn't really struggle that much, didn't really have to pay attention, but somehow still did well in school. And then I got to college and it was so overwhelming. I couldn't pay attention and I just really struggled my first year. And I had one of my roommates had ADHD. So I was like, when I was seeing a therapist, I was like, I think I have this. Like, I can't pay attention. Like, it's the only thing that makes sense. And then looking back at my childhood, I was like, I don't know how people missed that I had ADHD.
Right. I know it's always interesting, right? Because you see all of the signs once you understand it, but when people don't understand ADHD and how it is tied to some people, it is missed. So for example, for you, what were you actually diagnosed with?
I have the hyperactive type, and which totally makes sense. I know it's not typical for females, but I definitely don't sit still very well if I'm on calls, not with with my business coach. I cannot, those are the calls I get up all the time from. But and still listening, but it's just I always played sports, and I think that just kept me really busy all the time. So I always had something to do. And my mom definitely had a lot of structure for me. So I think that when it was all gone and I didn't have any structure, it was all of a sudden became real apparent that I had some issues going on. But even when I look back in school, I was always fidgeting, always bouncing around in my chair, I discovered gum, and then I always had gum in my mouth because that was a more acceptable thing to do than bounce around in your chair all the time. So looking back, I'm like, this all makes a lot of sense. So
it's really interesting you say that because so as I shared with you before we started the video, that my children went back to school, where my youngest, one of the things they asked for him to bring is gum. So that is also still used very much so today. And then he also sits on a pillow. So he actually sits on a pillow to allow him to be fidgety, right?
Yeah.
And it keeps him from getting up because he already feels like he's moving and rocking, and he's used that since kindergarten.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it is great. It's amazing the things that, if they understand what ADHD is, it's amazing, what the children are getting today, the support they're getting today. So, because it's really interesting that you said that you had nothing but medication and you did a lot of research. So where did you go? Where did you find the material that you needed to support you?
I did have a therapist, so I guess like when I look back, we never necessarily focused, I felt like, on ADHD.
Mhm.
But it was like a lot of like, okay, let's discuss like planning things out, getting things accomplished. And looking back, I never really like attached that to ADHD. I was just like, oh, this is what he wants to talk about today. So this is what we're talking about. And I'm like, no, he's definitely helping me like think about through my executive functioning a little bit more, as opposed to just like not thinking about it at all, because that's usually how then nothing happens. So I think subconsciously I worked through a lot of things with executive functioning skills without really realizing it. But just reading a lot of things on the internet, um, some books too have been very helpful. I'm trying to think, I have one somewhere. um, Dr. Hallwell's book is probably one of my favorite ones,
Nice.
um,
Very
with
nice.
ADHD.
So, what do you think? So, you said that you struggled in college, but once you knew, what were some of your struggles that you still experience even with the knowledge?
Organization. I have piles. Definitely I know where everything is. They're just in a lot of piles. And um, I would say that getting things like seeing them all the way through to fruition is something I definitely struggle with. Unless it's something I really, really like my work or things like that. But other things, that's definitely a struggle. Um, and I think too, like, which isn't talked about a lot, is like relationships with other people. And COVID has not made that very easy
Yeah.
to like be able to connect with people or meet new people, or, it just changes things a lot. But yeah, I would say relationships have always been something I struggle with, because I moved around a lot as a kid as well. So I was always the new kid. So I didn't really have like my friend group from elementary school that, I went to graduated high school with. I always was off kind of going to different schools. So I never really had like a core group of friends. It was always kind of changing. So I think that makes it hard to just not have a group like that. So
Makes sense. That makes sense. So, why do you think it was missed in your early school ages or your early school years?
I think part of it was, I think my parents just didn't want to see it, in some ways. And I think because I did well in school, it wasn't an issue. And my younger sister, I think she also has ADHD, but she's not diagnosed. But she had a lot more struggles with school. So a lot more attention was put on her. So she would do her homework and do things. I never had a problem like doing the things, because I felt like the pressure to do well and please other people. So for me, like making my teachers happy and doing my schoolwork was definitely there. And I had tutors and things too. So I think that also, I probably would have struggled if I didn't have them. So I think it just kind of got covered up as, and not necessarily put in like, oh, maybe she has ADHD. And I was always busy, like always doing stuff and playing sports. And I somehow, like, I don't know how my mom never thought that like I would just like aimlessly do laps around the outside of my house when I was bored. And like no kid does that like normally. And I just needed to move and like daydream in my head. And
Gotcha.
looking back, I'm like, that was definitely probably some of my ADHD showing.
Oh, that is too funny. That is too funny. It's kind of interesting to hear you say that because I just remember, because again, as somebody who's recently diagnosed, I also remember all of the things that I used to do when I was younger. Like I used to talk quite a bit. I used to get in trouble for that. And, so it's just really interesting to really connect the dots. But for us, or for me, I didn't know about ADHD. So I
Yeah.
didn't know it existed. And my parents, I don't know if they did or not, but talking to them today, especially my mom, she's like, yeah, I can see, I can see it. And she reminisces, but to really see it back then, we just didn't talk about it. So I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know it existed. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see, to reflect back.
Yeah, and I had friends like growing up, we had family friends who the boys had ADHD, and they were on a level 10 in terms of hyperactive. So I think that also probably was like, well, she's not like them, so she
Right.
must be okay. She's fine. She's not this crazy boy running all over the place. Although I was still running around doing all the same things as them, probably just not screaming at the top of my lungs. But it's like, I think that also, it's like people will be like, well, my son was diagnosed, and then you look at your kid and kind of compare, and you're like, well, they're not exactly like the same level of hyperactive, so like my kid must be fine. And but it's like, that's probably should like look into it a little bit.
I get it. So what would you say to parents who, they just discovered that their child has ADHD, and now somebody who knows that they do and has lived with it for a while now? What would you recommend to them, or what would be your tips for them?
Definitely reach out to like any of your education services, like if your kids are in younger, even grade school, reach out to them and like have a conversation so your kids can get the support academically that they need. Even in college, if your kids are in college and they get diagnosed, there's student health services. There's people who help you with learning disabilities, and even just like getting to sign up for your classes a little bit earlier, just in case, maybe you forget that it's the day to sign up or whatever. They really help and accommodate for you, which I think is important. And also just like looking back, because I've always felt like the new kid, I never felt like I quite fit in. My parents were like a safe space for me, and having them being able to like just get a hug from my parents when I maybe couldn't verbalize how I was feeling, but I didn't feel great. Or I didn't want to talk about my feelings, just being able to get a hug from them was so huge. I remember watching someone's Instagram live about ADHD, and I remember them talking about that, and I was like, those hugs were so powerful. Like just being able to know that you are loved when you maybe have all those negative thoughts your kids are having in their head that they have a lot more of. So like being there to say you are loved, and like that I think is really powerful. So it helps kind of just having that support, and just being encouraging too, I think is really helpful.
Becca, I love that. You're right. It is so powerful. I'm part of a couple of the parent groups, and it's amazing, even from the parent side, how some people don't do that, and admit that they don't do that, and they do other things. But that's one thing they don't, is give a lot of their children the love that they need. And it's very frustrating and sad all at the same time, because I know with my children, they always want to know that you have faith in them and that you still love them even when they are struggling, right? And they don't want you to think that they are a bad person. They don't want to be that way. And so those hugs, I mean, you're right, those simple things, those hugs make a huge difference. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's like showing them, even if they are trying to do something and they're failing at it, just continuing to show them love, and that like it's okay, you're still trying, because I think we tend to give up when we fail, and then we get bad feedback from other people. So that negative feedback makes us not want to continue. So if you're the parent and you're there to be like, I love you, let's keep trying, it keeps them going and makes them feel like that it's not a limiting thing for them.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so let's move into the nutrition piece. So you're a dietitian,
yes,
and you really connected to nutrition and ADHD. How did that all come about?
So I I got laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was trying to start my online, like a virtual practice, because I'd been wanting to do that really since I became a dietitian. And I was like, this just feels like the right time to do this. And I had my best friend was my ideal client that I was kind of working with. And it took me a while, but we couldn't she was struggling with binge eating. And we started going through things and realized that like she wouldn't eat all day on her meds. And then at night she would binge eat, and she'd also do that out of stress and dealing with anxiety. And so I put a poll out in a Facebook group that was nice enough to let me do that. And I didn't really lead, was like, what are you struggling with nutrition? And binge eating was like the number one thing that women responded with. So I was like, then I started diving into like all the stuff on the internet about it, which there isn't a whole lot. Compared to it's usually like the last footnote in a research article is like eating disorders. It's like all these other things, and they sometimes add in eating disorders, sometimes they don't. but I was like, man, no one's talking about this. And I was like, this needs to be talked about. And then I started reflecting back on my own experiences with disordered eating and realized that like a lot of when I was in grad school, that was something I struggled with, was binging when my meds would wear off, and I'd be really frustrated because I was studying to be a dietitian. Like I shouldn't have issues with food, with how I felt. And so I didn't really talk about it with people, but I started to look into intuitive eating because that was like the first dietitian I found on Instagram when I was in grad school practices intuitive eating. And I was like, this sounds interesting. I was like, listening to what your body's telling you as opposed to like following a diet, I don't know, that sounds like kind of woo woo, honestly. I was like, that sounds a little out there. And then I started really reading into it and looking into it and realized that like mindfulness things were really beneficial for me. And I think that that's kind of why I was like, I want to help people maybe not necessarily be on a really strict, rigid diet, which is hard for people to stick to begin with, but being able to turn inward and listen to what their body is telling them they need.
So how do you balance that? So one of the things that, of course, like my son who struggles, to your point, during the time he is on medication, especially that lunchtime hour, he doesn't want to eat, right? And so then, like you said, he's extremely hungry. I'll say probably about 7:30, and then it's just hungry after that, right?
Hungry, yeah.
The beauty is that he goes to bed early right now. But my concern is that, once he gets much older and he stays up later, the kitchen will be empty every morning. We'll go in and there'll be no food. And I laugh about it, but I have heard stories like that. I mean, I've heard people say they've had to put locks on, their refrigerator or their cabinet or wherever they keep the food that the kids keep eating, because they literally will binge eat just like that. And they don't eat like a couple things. They'll eat a whole bag of something, right?
Yep.
How do you deal with something like that?
So one of the things I do is like working on identifying hunger cues, because a lot of times we only associate like our stomach grumbling as I'm hungry. So a lot of times trying to figure out maybe there's some other less obvious signs of hunger, like mood changes. I notice for me, it sounds really funny, but I get angry at my computer because it's not working fast enough, usually around lunchtime. And I get really agitated and I'm like, why is it not working fast enough? And I'm like, the computer's not working any slower. You're hangry. And so then I take that as a sign I should probably pause and eat something, even though like I don't have a normal physical signs of hunger. And also like for kids too, like maybe not giving them full meals, like allowing them or giving them the permission to be more of like a grazer as opposed to someone who like has, breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, allowing them to kind of pick a little bit and making sure the foods they do eat are a little bit more nutritionally dense. Yeah. So that way when their meds wear off, at least if the more you get in earlier in the day, the less likely when you get off your meds, you're going to be really ravenous. So trying to kind of adjust it. And the more you kind of repeat and get into routines, it starts to be like, I used to not eat when I was on my meds when I started. And then I was like, you need to eat food because you keep eating all the food at night and it's not working. So like, I might not really be hungry, but I've got myself into like kind of a routine. And I notice when I am like, I will get like either really tired or my mood will change. Sometimes I get dizzy. So it's just kind of figuring out things that you might not associate with like, oh, that's hunger type of thing. And then kind of adjusting accordingly, basically.
I like that. And one thing I just want to share that I do with my son is we do I call it conscious eating. So for example, I'll pack maybe 5 things and he only has to pick 3. And we do it out of a certain group. So like you said, we may have a yogurt and we have his protein and fruit and crackers and maybe some chips. But he only has to eat a few things out of there. And it really does work because to your point, he's not hungry, but he consciously knows that during this time, if I am off my meds, because every so often on the weekend, I may take him off his meds. And part of it is to show him that, see, during lunchtime, you are still hungry. Because of course, when he's off his meds, he's eating like all day, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because just trying to get him to, it's more of an intelligent or just a conscious connection. He's not going to feel it. We already established you're not going to feel this way. So how can we connect you to, yes, I still need to eat. So to your point, he doesn't have to eat a lot. I just have him eat a few things just to cover that, because I already know he's going to eat a little bit more later, right?
Yep.
And so that's kind of what I've been trying to do with him. Make sure he has some of those nutritionally dense things. I do a couple of fat things. And then the funny thing is that he doesn't always pick the fat things. He's actually very conscious of how he eats. He likes his fruits and his cheese stick or his yogurt. He prefers those type of things. So it's actually pretty interesting to watch. Sometimes I'll say, you can't eat the chips. It's okay. Once in a while, eat them.
That to me, see, so giving him the options is, for me, is great, because you're giving him the autonomy to pick and choose what he wants to eat. And so you're allowing him to listen to what his body is telling him, as opposed, even like, if it might not be like hunger, but it's more of like a taste hunger of what's going to taste good. And that's better than at least like, I'm not eating all day long, and then when I get off of my meds, I'm going to be ravenous, or like, I'm not going to be the most pleasant person because I haven't eaten all day.
That's exactly right. Exactly. Yeah. So what is your tips in terms of how do they even start this journey? So how do they even get their, first of all, as a parent, the right mindset, but then getting their children to follow this plan or new strategy?
So I work mostly with adults. I'm not super trained with children. I only did like a week rotation in my internship in a peds hospital. And other than that, I was in a VA. So I killed it in the 65 and up community. But with children, I think a lot of it is availability and making things available to them. Because a lot of times that way, it's an option, and maybe they might not want to eat it. They might want to eat it. Helping them also sit down. It's again, that's really hard for a lot of us, is like sitting down. Even with my adult clients, sitting down without distractions is huge, and eating and focusing on it as like what you're actually doing can be really helpful, because kids always like want to get up and go do something else, or they want to be in front of the TV and they're not paying any attention to what the food or is in front of them. And adults do the same thing too. We need all that extra stimulation, but trying to focus in on the meals or the snacks so that they're more inclined to eat. And like, this is just kind of, we're going to take a pause for a second so you can like nourish your body, and kind of looking at it as like fuel can also be helpful. I know for kids, is like telling them they're fueling themselves sometimes is helpful.
Very cool. Very cool. So as we wrap things up, so we had talked a little bit earlier about, any resources. So do you have any resources that you can think of around eating correctly, or giving your particular website? So any information out there, be it YouTube videos or other books, anything around nutrition and ADHD.
So the intuitive eating book itself is amazing. And they have a section in there too about raising intuitive eaters. So how to, help your kids be in that sort of mindset, as opposed to like, this food's good and this food's bad. And then that kind of, those messages are meant to be so helpful, but it ends up becoming internalized a lot of times for people. So then when they make a bad food choice, they feel bad about themselves. So learning how to like you do, provide options for your kids and let them pick and kind of guide themselves, because they know what makes them feel good, just like we know what makes us feel good. So giving them the space to do that. I really loved that book. They have a website as well with a lot of resources. So if you're like, what is this intuitive eating? Their website's really great. Attitude, I like too. Their website has a lot of good nutrition information. It's like the most I've found, at least on the internet, that's available. because I think a lot of times it's just kind of, it's a lot, we always try to like have that all or none mindset with, and especially with nutrition, that's definitely the case. But intuitive eating is like for the most part thinking, which I think is really helpful. If you have ADHD, is like not, you're not going to be consistent, probably, most likely. You're not very, like, we struggle with being consistent, but this, it kind of helps you realize like you don't have to eat vegetables at every single meal, like for instance. But like for the most part, if you are having like vegetables at your meals, you're going to be healthy. But if you miss one meal and you don't have vegetables, you're not going to like go into a deficiency all of a sudden. So it's just, like you're going to be okay. And like tomorrow there'll be vegetables. It's all right. But I think that's probably, those are like the best resources I have. I really wish there were more. Like I'm in the process of making a website. So when that gets done, I'll definitely send it your way. But I definitely think we need more resources for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So if they had any more questions for you, where can they reach you? What is like your Instagram handle or any other?
Yeah. I use Instagram mostly. I'm on Facebook, but I don't really use it. So on Instagram, I'm more active. I'll be more responsive there at ADHD.nutritionist.
Perfect. Any last minute thoughts for the audience? Anything you'd like to close out with?
Not that I can think of. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think we covered a lot.
It was great. It was great. And
awesome.
People, I think it's really funny because people don't realize how important nutrition is, especially tied to ADHD. And that was one of the things that I worked on from day one. And actually, even before deciding to go to medication, I was very strict on his eating plan, and actually my daughter too, because she went through similar situations. So I was very, very conscious of the eating plan. I still am, but I'm a little bit more flexible now. I mean, now because we know that medication is one of the tools that we use, and I say one of the tools. But but I'm not as strict as I used to be. But it was like, like you said, just really making sure that they had a very clean diet. I think that's probably why my son is as health conscious as he is. I mean, he still likes candy and cookies, don't get me wrong, but he is the type of person that will actually have a bag of cookies and eat 3.
Yeah, and that's like exactly what intuitive eating is like giving the space to make all foods feel the same. Like, because when we put sugar up on this pedestal, your kid is more likely to want that food because it's like this special glorified food that they can't have. So when you like normalize it and bring it back down, your kid's going to feel probably better when they eat vegetables and their fruit and healthful, nutritious things. So giving them the space and then realizing, I don't need to eat all the cookies. I can have a couple in my little bag and they're good. And figuring out, I think the other piece, I guess, for me, last thing is like, everyone's different. So regardless of like the nutrition recommendations you might find on the internet, like figuring out what works best for you or your kids, like, and what's realistic. Cause like, there's so many things out there about cut out this, cut out this, cut out this. And it's like, if that's not realistic, don't pressure yourself to try to do that because it's just going to cause way, 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 way more stress than necessary. Like if it's going to stress you out and it's going to cause a lot of issues in the family, I would say like that's probably don't have to go that route. Or if you notice like my kid can eat some food group that they tell you not to eat, like soy, my kid eats soy and they're fine, then that's okay. Like you don't need to cut it out then. Like if you notice it's something that like really causes them a negative reaction when they eat it, and then maybe like figuring out if it's worth keeping in the diet or not. But being open to like allowing your kids to figure out what works best for them.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. Love it. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. I'm so glad to have met you, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Yes, same to you.